If you had stood in the Roman Forum in 200 AD, you would have seen a city that believed it would last forever. Marble colonnades lined the squares. Merchants shouted prices from shaded stalls. Lawyers argued beneath statues of dead generals. Soldiers on leave spent their pay in wine shops and bathhouses. Everywhere, coins passed from hand to hand. Silver discs stamped with the faces of emperors moved through the crowd with the same quiet authority as the legions themselves. Rome did not rule only with armies. It ruled with agreement. A farmer in Gaul accepted the same money as a dock worker in Ostia. A trader in Syria trusted a coin minted in Spain. Across thousands of miles, people believed the same small piece of metal meant the same thing. This was the empire's true miracle. Roads and walls could be built with labor. Trust could not. At the center of this system stood the denarius. For generations, it had been made mostly of silver. Not pure silver, but close enough that its value was visible and measurable. You could weigh it. You could melt it. Could trade it for grain, cloth, or labor, and expect roughly the same result every time. Roman money worked because Roman money contained what it claimed to represent, but an empire of this size was expensive to maintain. The army alone consumed enormous resources. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers had to be paid regularly, fed continuously, and equipped for wars that never truly ended. The frontiers were long and fragile. Germanic tribes pressed from the north. Persian forces threatened the east. Rebellions flared in distant provinces. Each crisis required legions, and each legion required silver. The city of Rome itself added to the burden. Over 1 million people depended on imported grain. Ships crossed the Mediterranean simply to keep bread cheap and crowds calm. Aqueducts needed repair. Temples rose. Bureaucracies expanded. Officials multiplied. The state grew heavier with every generation. For a long time, conquest had solved this problem. Victories brought plunder. Mines in Spain and the Balkans supplied metal. Taxes flowed inward from new territories, but conquest slowed. Mines grew deeper. Yields fell. Obligations remained. The emperors faced a dilemma they could not escape. Raising taxes risked revolt. Cutting the army risked invasion. Reducing spending risked disorder. There was no central bank, no credit system, no paper currency. Only metal could be turned into money. So they altered the metal. At first, the change was small. A little less silver in each coin, a little more copper mixed into the alloy. The weight stayed similar. The stamp remained imperial. The value printed on the coin did not change. Only its substance did. Nothing was announced. No proclamation explained the adjustment. New coins entered circulation quietly alongside old ones. Most people noticed nothing. A denarius still looked like a denarius. It still bought bread. It still paid wages. The system continued to function. For a time, the solution worked. The state paid soldiers with the new coins. Soldiers spent them in taverns and markets. Tax collectors accepted them. Merchants passed them along. Rome had, in effect, created additional silver by reducing the amount of silver required per coin. It was a financial shortcut that postponed immediate crisis. But value does not obey law. It obeys material. Merchants began to weigh payments more often. Scales appeared on counters. Old coins were set aside. They were saved, hidden, or melted. The newer coins circulated faster, while the older, purer ones disappeared. The marketplace slowly separated money into two categories: money to keep and money to spend. Prices moved upward in small increments. A loaf cost slightly more. Wine followed. Wages lagged behind. No one spoke of inflation. They blamed traders. They blamed harvests. They blamed shortages. The coin itself was rarely accused. From the palace, Rome still looked rich. Processions still marched. Statues still rose. Victories were still announced. The empire continued to present itself as permanent. But the meaning of its money had begun to change. Money is not just metal. It is memory. It records what things are worth and carries that knowledge forward. When the metal weakens, the memory weakens with it. People begin to doubt yesterday's prices. Tomorrow becomes harder to predict. The first alteration did not destroy trust. It tested it. And once tested, the method was easy to repeat. Each war required new pay. Each emperor needed loyalty. Each crisis demanded speed. So the silver was reduced again and again and again. The denarius that had once reflected the strength of Rome's mines and victories became thinner in substance, while remaining full in symbol. The emperor's face still promised stability. The metal beneath it no longer did. Citizens did not yet see the danger. They still trusted the stamp. They still trusted Rome. Empires train people to believe in symbols, standards, crowns, coins. But belief can outrun reality only for so long. The coins still shone, the market still opened, the soldiers still marched, yet the silver was already leaving. And once trust begins to leave money, it rarely does so quietly. By the middle of the 3rd century, the change in Rome's money could no longer be hidden inside the metal. What had begun as a minor adjustment became a habit. Each new emperor inherited the same financial pressures and reached for the same solution. Wars still had to be fought. Armies still had to be paid. The frontiers could not be allowed to collapse. And so with every reign, the silver content of the coin was reduced again. The denarius lost substance while keeping its face. What had once been mostly silver became half silver. Then a third. Then a thin coating of silver spread over copper. The stamp of the emperor still declared its worth, but the weight of the metal no longer supported the claim. People noticed that new coins bent more easily. They tarnished more quickly. They left green stains on the fingers. Money began to look like something else. Merchants adapted before the state did. Prices rose not because bread was scarcer, but because the coin was weaker. A sack of grain required more pieces of money than before, not more effort to produce. Soldiers received higher wages in number, but not in power. The figures on the payrolls grew while their meaning shrank. The marketplace adjusted its behavior. Buyers argued longer. Sellers demanded more. Farmers delayed bringing goods to town, uncertain what the coins would be worth when they returned home. Why trade solid food for uncertain metal? Why exchange certainty for doubt? Trade did not vanish, but it became cautious. The older coins disappeared, or melted down, hidden, or hoarded. Only the newer, thinner coins circulated freely. Rome created a divided currency without meaning to. One kind of money was trusted, the other was merely used. The state tried to hold the line with law. Emperors issued edicts fixing prices and wages. They declared what bread should cost and what labor should earn. They forbade sellers from charging more. They threatened punishment for those who refused to accept the official coin. But law could not restore silver to copper. When prices could not rise legally, goods became scarce. When sellers could not protect themselves with higher prices, they protected themselves by withholding supply. Markets grew quieter, shelves emptied, trade routes thinned. Rome attempted to command reality rather than adapt to it. Taxation changed in response. Instead of demanding payment in money, the state demanded payment in goods. Wheat, oil, cloth, livestock. Tax collectors arrived with wagons rather than scales. The government no longer trusted its own currency to support itself. It sought value directly from the land. This altered the relationship between citizen and state. Surplus became dangerous. A good harvest invited confiscation. Large herd invited inspection. Peasants learned to produce only what they could hide. Improvement lost its reward. Safety replaced ambition. As trade weakened, cities began to shrink. It's not from fire or siege at first, but from irrelevance. When money cannot be trusted, distance becomes costly. Exchange becomes risky. People drifted towards subsistence and away from markets. Urban life depended on circulation. When circulation failed, cities hollowed from within. The army felt the strain as well. Soldiers were paid in debased coin and knew it. Loyalty weakened as purchasing power fell. Commanders compensated by allowing plunder. Discipline bent under necessity. Provinces learned to fear the legions that once protected them. To stabilize the army, emperors offered land instead of money. Farms replaced wages. Settlement replaced payroll. Soldiers became tied to soil rather than to the treasury. Their loyalty became local. Empire still looked whole on maps. Its laws were still written. Its emperors still issued decrees. But its economy had lost a common measure. Money no longer linked province to province or worker to state. Value fragmented into regions and relationships. Once money ceases to function as a shared language, exchange becomes translation. Every transaction must be negotiated anew. Trust narrows, complexity shrinks. Rome did not collapse into chaos. It retreated into simplicity. Barter returned. Local systems replaced imperial ones. Villages relied on neighbors rather than markets. Distance became luxury. Uniformity became memory. The coin continued to circulate, but only because there was no alternative. It moved not because people believed in it, but because they were forced to use it. An empire that once governed through agreement increasingly governed through command. And command is expensive. Each attempt to preserve stability required more money. Each creation of money weakened trust. Each loss of trust required more force. The process fed itself. By the time the emperors recognized the depth of the damage, the habit was too deeply learned. They had trained their subjects to doubt their currency. They had trained their soldiers to expect erosion. They trained their markets to fear tomorrow. Rome still had emperors, still had armies. It still had laws carved in stone. But it no longer had money that meant the same thing to everyone. And once an empire loses its shared measure of value, it begins to lose its ability to hold itself together. In the final part of this story, we will see what happens when trust in currency turns into trust in land. When soldiers fight for property instead of pay, and when the slow collapse of money becomes the slow collapse of empire itself. By the late 4th century, Rome still appeared to rule the world. Emperors issued edicts. Governors collected taxes. Armies guarded frontiers. But the system that had once bound these pieces together had weakened. The empire still possessed power, but it had lost coordination. What had once moved through silver now moved through force. Money no longer carried trust across distance. A coin from one province did not mean the same thing in another. Value depended on who accepted it and under what conditions. Exchange became personal instead of institutional. Markets narrowed into neighborhoods. Trade routes shortened. The great web of imperial commerce contracted into regional threads. Cities felt this first. Urban life depended on circulation. Food had to arrive, wages had to be paid, goods had to be sold. When money lost meaning, these movements slowed. Workshops closed, merchants left, public spaces emptied. The marble remained, but the activity faded. Rome and its provincial capitals shrank not from destruction, but from abandonment. The countryside changed as well. Land replaced currency as the safest form of wealth. Grain could be eaten. Livestock could be bred. Fields could not be debased. Families tied themselves to estates for protection. Patrons replaced officials. Obligation replaced contract. Economic life settled into fixed relationships rather than open markets. Taxation hardened into extraction. The state demanded goods instead of coins and enforced delivery with soldiers. Compliance became survival. Resistance became flight. Villages learned to hide surplus. Productivity declined not because people forgot how to work, but because reward had been replaced by risk. The army transformed with the economy. Pay lost its power. Loyalty weakened. Emperors compensated with land grants and privileges. Soldiers settled on farms they were meant to defend. Commanders became landlords. The army remained large, but it was no longer a unified machine. It became a collection of local forces with local interests. This shift altered Rome's political structure. Authority depended less on law and more on personal power. Officials ruled where they could enforce. Governors negotiated where they could not. The imperial center still issued commands, but those commands traveled through weakened channels. Distance became a barrier again. When invasions intensified, the empire responded unevenly. Some regions resisted. Others collapsed. Coordination required money, and money no longer coordinated. Defense became improvised. Security became regional. The idea of a single imperial response faded. Historians would later point to many causes for Rome's fall. Military pressure, internal division, disease, religious change. Each played a role, but beneath them ran a quieter failure. The mechanism that once allowed Rome to mobilize resources, reward service, and maintain trust had broken. Money had stopped working as a universal language. An empire depends on abstraction. Laws that apply everywhere. Coins that mean the same thing everywhere. Authority that extends beyond personal presence. When money fails, abstraction fails. Society becomes immediate, local, concrete. Complex systems simplify because they cannot be maintained. Rome did not collapse into anarchy. It settled into smaller worlds. Markets became estates. Contracts became oaths. Currency became land. What had once been an economy of movement became an economy of attachment. People stayed where they were safe. They worked where they were protected. They paid whom they could see. The empire's scale dissolved into lived space. Centuries later, travelers would walk through ruins and find coins in the dust. The faces of emperors still visible, the symbols of victory still sharp, but the metal beneath was thin. The promise outlasted the substance. The Roman state had tried to solve a structural problem with a monetary shortcut. It had replaced silver with authority. For a time, the stamp was enough. But authority cannot create value. It can only declare it. Inflation did not destroy Rome in a single moment. It hollowed it out slowly. It weakened the links that turned territory into system and power into order. It turned exchange into suspicion and planning into improvisation.
Our Romanian walls.
Walls fell because the machinery behind them failed. The empire that once ruled through agreement ended by ruling through command. Command without trust becomes expensive. Expensive systems strain. Strained systems break. Rome did not die in battle alone. It unraveled in its accounts. When its money forgot what it represented, the empire forgot how to hold itself together.